Hello and welcome to another episode of the Human Guinea Pig Project. I'm here with Gemma Herbertson. She has a very interesting story and I'm sure you'll be interested in hearing more about it. I noticed there are parallels with our stories in how her son had a brain tumor and has been managing this with a number of different methods. And so I'm excited to speak to her. Welcome to the podcast, Gemma.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here.
Now, I guess the best place to start is at the beginning. So could you just mention what happened with your son and how you've managed to cope through what you've done, and also emotionally and with your event that's coming up? Is it a summit, or how would you describe it?
Yes, it is a summit. It's an online summit. I can give that a quick plug now, if that's okay. It's called Education, the Neuro Frontier, and we'll talk about my son in a second, but you also mentioned how I've coped emotionally and so on. I have to see silver linings in things and reframe them as this has, to find a positive out of situations when they're really quite desperate. Otherwise, well, I don't know what the otherwise is, because that's how I keep going through things. And so I have a number of what I call silver lining projects as a result of my son's journey, and put together a website as a set of resources, and that's neurofrontiers.org. And then I've just next week, I'm very excited, so from the 17th to 21st of January, there's an online summit with 34 amazing speakers from all across the world who have something to say on something called Neuroplasticity Therapies. And do you want me to talk about what they are now, or should we come on to that later?
Yeah, let's go back to the beginning and say what inspired all of this fantastic work, because one of the main reasons I thought it would be great to hear from you is because you've collected so many resources that can be extremely useful for other people dealing with these, well, with epilepsy and brain tumors, and also different neurological conditions, because there's a lot of commonalities between these different conditions and syndromes and diseases. So I first heard about your story and your upcoming summit through a great group on a great Facebook group called Diets for Epilepsy. And I've learned so many things from that group. It's amazing. Sometimes the best information comes from people who are dealing with this themselves day to day. And sometimes we have limited options from the experts who are attempting to find solutions. Sometimes the first line and the second and third and fourth line possibilities in terms of treatments are always more drugs or different drugs. So when we have a more holistic view of this, which is what you're sharing, it's not necessarily replacing medication, because I wouldn't advocate that. It's just hearing about all of the options. And I think you do that really well. So let's go back to the start. Just how did you know that your son had a brain tumor, and what was your response from there?
So how did I know? Well, he was born and was just, gorgeous baby, and then 20 days later he started turning blue, and the very first time he started was going blue was very early in the morning, and I'd already had one child by then, so I knew that this wasn't quite normal. So we called an ambulance, and that was the first of many trips in ambulances, and then eventually we were admitted to hospital and stayed in hospital for roughly 3 months. when he was very little. And that was a very traumatic experience for a number of reasons, because we were stuck in a small room. There was, I can't remember whether it was swine flu or bird flu, but something was about, he wasn't in, hadn't had any vaccinations or anything. He appeared to be what they kept acting as if they were resuscitating him. So that's what they thought, oh gosh, he keeps dying, we'll resuscitate him. As you said about protocols and first line, second line, so on. They had a number of theories. Oh, perhaps it's reflux, and he's choking on things himself, or maybe his heart's not working, maybe there's something wrong with the lungs. So we went through all these things, and then we were in something called HGU, which is a high dependency unit in the hospital, and a consultant came in and witnessed one of these episodes and then said, oh, that's epilepsy. And then very quickly after that, we were sent home. And I was thinking, well, this is just crazy. Just because we got a name, now we can go home. So it was, it was the start of quite a, it's a very turbulent time, I think. So they gave us some drugs, and for a few weeks at a time, the seizures seemed to ease or stop, and then they would just come back again. And then they would try something else, or then they would say, gosh, a baby can't take this for too long. I think it was carbamazepine or phenobarbital, one of those, which you can't take for very long because it's not good for baby's development. So we tried all sorts of drugs. It just seemed to be one to the next, one to the next, one to the next. And the summary is that they didn't work, and they didn't work over a period of 4 years. And we changed hospitals, and the new hospital found that my son had a brain tumour, and that had been the cause of it. Now, in those 4 years, you said about how consultants, they are experts and they try to various things, they follow protocols and so on. But I think you, me, and many people probably listening are the sort of people who will become their own experts on their own case, because the human need is for survival, so we want to survive. So when we get absolutely desperate, we'll do all sorts. So in those 4 years where I wasn't, there weren't any answers really coming from the NHS. First of all, when I first came into the NHS, I watched, I thought, oh, I thought that doctors were gods for a start, and they'll have the answers. But then very soon, we came in August, and August is a time when most consultants take annual leave, and it's a time of switch over from junior doctors, and then you get the new set in. So I can't tell you how many, well, I can. I remember at one point my son's father and I were discussing, and we guessed that we'd had about 14 different opinions at that point. And I was thinking, this is so strange, because nobody seems to know that, what could possibly be. And so that's when it I thought that medicine just had the answers, because in the UK here, we've got a program, Holby City, and people go in and they get fixed and then they go home, and it's a nice happy ending. And the happy ending wasn't coming. And during those 4 years, for a lot of it, my son was having about 500 seizures a week, and that was day and night. And so I was having roughly 2 to 3 hours of broken sleep a day, and I couldn't. Sleep deprivation is a very, very cruel, horrible thing, and my son wasn't getting much more sleep than me, but it was just a crazy life, and I was almost in survival mode. I want this to stop, something has to change. And that's been I hardly went out. I couldn't, because it was just so hard to go out anywhere. So I became an avid researcher, and I read everything I possibly could on PubMed, as it was then. And I know there's other better journals, but it was quite a good resource. to read, and I just kept reading and reading and reading, and you know, anything I could, whilst particularly while my son was recovering. So he'd have a seizure and then he'd be post-ictal and then eventually go to sleep, but I had to watch him and be vigilant. So so yeah, I just read and read, and that's partway through that time was when the Diets for Epilepsy Facebook group was born, because I was had to think outside of the box, because the consultants weren't generating answers. Just you know, bless them, they're all lovely people and doing the best that they could with their training, but I just thought, you know, I was just a prisoner by this life. You know, I couldn't, you know, I was so sad. I'd made friends as a pregnant mum. You make friends who are going to have a baby at the same time as you, and it was all very exciting. And then I couldn't mix or do anything with those friends, and my life was so different than theirs. All their babies were growing and developing, and bless him, my son would develop a bit, and then a seizure would knock out that learning, and you know, he wasn't very good. So after 4 years, he ended up having some brain surgery to remove his tumour. Prior to that, though, I had, as I said, started up diets for epilepsy, and I found that diet really could help. So that, these 500 seizures, or a little bit more than that, I was such a scientist, kept a record, made bar charts, graphs, everything. I kept daily records. I've got boxes and boxes of notes I've made, because I was determined to find all the triggers. So I started with diets for epilepsy, and I just wanted to find other solutions to see what, you know, possibly could be triggering it. So we went from 500 seizures a week down to 130 a week by going gluten-free and dairy-free. And then I discovered another lovely lady, Margaret Maloba. She's a good physician, and she suggested that we looked at antioxidants as well, and that seemed to help. And so began quite a journey of thinking outside of the conventional box.
How did you hear about her? Where is she based?
She was based in Manchester at the time, and I'm so sorry, but my memory isn't perfect for how I came across her. I think, well, as it turned out, one of her children was at the same school as my child, but I don't know if that's how I met her. I'm really sorry. When you're sleep deprived, your memory doesn't work as well as it should do. So it'll be in a notebook somewhere.
I'll provide a link to.
And so yeah, so our journey progressed, and then we found out, anyway, shall I talk about when we found out when my son had his tumour? I think if I come to that point, that's
yeah, I think it's interesting that you separate it out the way you do with the epilepsy and the brain tumour. There's often this feeling from that I've experienced through neurologists that somehow brain tumour related epilepsy is completely different from normal epilepsy in terms of how you're supposed to manage it. There's even less openness to these other management strategies away from drugs. I don't know if you've experienced a similar thing, but that's my experience.
I haven't experienced that, but that's interesting, because my son's epilepsy was down as idiopathic, so without a known cause.
Okay.
Until we, as I say, we swapped hospitals, and then they found he'd had a tumour, probably since birth. So yeah, and then but already I discovered something which worked sort of stronger than the medications, you know, that being diet, although I was constantly tweaking, because, oh no, he's had a really bad bout of seizures, what could that have been? So, you know, and there were you know, and it is, you know, you become a big detective if you're interested in finding a solution, and if you I wish I hadn't, but I did lose some faith in the conventional system, just because of, as I say, all these different opinions and nothing working, and it not being like Holby City, So I found you have to become your own expert, as I've said. So yeah,
it can be a real trial and error process, which isn't ideal when you're experiencing, albeit secondhand, all of these. Well, you're watching, in your case, you're watching someone who's your son having these horrible seizures, and you feel like you have no control. And then even tweaking things, you don't want to make things worse. So yeah, it's a tricky situation, because I managed that myself in a similar fashion, taking copious amounts of notes over the years and taking things out, adding things back in, everything being a trigger, and maybe that's not the case, but let's try this, and maybe this might work. How much of this should I take? How much different macronutrients? What's viable, what's not? All of these things, even thinking about interactions with the medication. Am I on the right amount of medication? Should I change? Are these symptoms side effects of being on the medication, or are they seizure related? All of these questions. Yeah, I don't know if your experiences are similar to that, or maybe a little bit different. But
your podcast is very well named, as because you are a guinea pig.
Reluctantly, yeah.
Yes, and which is a shame, that the science is probably out there, but it's not yet highly individualized enough for us to be able to say, right, you're presenting with all these symptoms and signs, and so then this is exactly the protocol that you need to follow. So, and there's a tendency, if you look at people in the Diet for Epilepsy group, all a fantastic bunch, and I've been in the same boat as them, in that you think, right, well, I'll try this, and I'll try that, and I'll try that, and I'll try that. Oh, brilliant, these are all good things. Yeah, I'll put those in. And then before you know it, you've thrown in about 15 different variables. So that's the worst type of guinea pig research, because I don't even know which one was the good one and which wasn't. But that's and then somehow you sort of stumble upon things that work. And then when you set up, trial and error, I think, when you've had a good day, it's not just noticing all the bad things, like, how can I replicate that day? What can I, so you really take notice of, well, I did, of the good days, and what happened in the last 24 hours, 48 hours before that. How can I replicate that all over again?
Yeah, sometimes it can be completely random, and you think, well, how's that the case? And is it something hormonal or environmental, rather than, say, something more obvious in front of your face, like diet, or stress, or lack of sleep? What are all these other causes or triggers, let's say? And then you could just be going mad thinking about what was the reason. But yeah, it's very difficult. And I think I have a good idea for me personally about what those things are now, and I've managed it very well. But sometimes I get overconfident and get relaxed, and then I suddenly have a focal seizure. But yeah, how is it with your son? How old is he now? And what do you feel has been the most effective strategies that you've implemented for him? And has he had any issues, obviously being a child, with maybe being a fussy eater, or not wanting to comply with any of these types of treatments, I guess?
So how is he now, and then the sorts of treatments? So how is he now? He's 12 years old now, and loads of great things. So after Eddy is his name, after Eddy's operation, when he was 4, he was given a mental age of about, for many, I don't know, they sort of divided up into different skill areas, but for about 3 months. So he needed his nappy changing, he was still 4 and in nappies, and no speech, doubly incontinent. He spent a lot of time in his wheelchair. He's just completely exhausted. And one of his eyes turned out, and that was strange. He lost his ability to map, so he would go from one room to the next and wouldn't be able to remember how to get back, from the kitchen to the lounge. So, and memory was very, very poor in that way as well. So lots of different strategies helped. I'll mention a number of them. So the key ones, and we'll try and dive in maybe a bit deeper to each of them. So diet was a good thing that worked. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy, some of that. Neuroplasticity therapies, and then something called the exchange breathing method. So those 4 things came together, and lifestyle, I think, as well. We must throw that in there. Something which really helped. So if I go through those things?
Yeah, I think going through those things one by one, because there's quite a few different aspects that you've mentioned. I'd say it's very interesting with diets, because people tend to have their area that they like to focus on, and they maybe don't look at the whole picture. I know that you've shared some information on the gut microbiome, and there is that gut-brain connection. So this will definitely be a very individual thing. And how would you say that you navigated that for Eddy, and what do you think would be the aspects of that others can benefit from learning about?
I was thinking about how others can benefit. It is, and as actually what you said, the word navigate. Sadly, there's not that many experts out there that we can easily go to. It's not. All you need to do is go into your doctor and ask for this, because there isn't one size fits all protocol. I think that's we are individual. Even our gut microbiome is quite individual, and that's just one aspect. How everyone's environment is different, and what you're exposed to on a daily level. I mean, is there mold in your house? Is there not? Do you go to a swimming pool that's very heavily chlorinated or not? So everyone has a different lifestyle and so on. So there's so many. We talked about variables just now. There are so many different variables in everybody's lives, and we are very unique as humans. So we need something quite unique for each person, and that's why I would encourage people to go and see a professional. And by a professional, I mean somebody who's sort of licensed to look at nutritional aspects, and if they can look at lifestyle as well beyond just nutrition, then that's a brilliant starting place, because you need to understand where you are at and get a baseline for as many lab tests or whatever they're going to run, and work from there. So you're working what you need, so one of my mottos for life is you make the best decisions with the best knowledge possible, and you need enough of it. So, and the enough point, keep going and keep going. That's, you don't need to go too far, but if you can get, the more you can get, the better. So if you and you need someone to interpret that. So as a mum, I wasn't able to interpret that. I did my best and I tried to learn as much as possible, but the best is to go and see somebody that knows what they're talking about. And at the moment, that generally means going on recommendations from the internet is a blessing, and you can talk to other mums. I'm in this country, can anyone recommend? Or I'm in Europe, where could I go in Europe with somebody who knows about this? And you through setting up something like my group, then you can then start to get referred. And I also, on my website, I've got a practitioner locator and ideas about where people can go to find people who know what they're talking about. I would recommend some people who've been trained at the Karazian Institute. So he does an excellent course on neuroinflammation, and that's Dr. Datus Karazian. He's based in California, but
I've read his book. It's really great.
Oh, and he's a lovely person as well. So a really a good teacher, fantastic teacher. So I've done one of his courses. But if you can go to someone who's got one of his qualifications, that's good. And I'm sure other people on your podcast will have told you other people of, this is how to make that judgment that someone really does know what they're talking about. But so this is one tip for people who with epilepsy and seizures to see if they can find. So he's got a practitioner locator, but you can look on my website, Neuro Fronteirs, and you can find a link to him and his practitioner locator. So they're and yeah, so that's the sort of help with diet. You did ask me something else.
No, I think that's fantastic. Yeah, I've read his book. I think it's called "Why Does My Brain Hurt" or something like that.
Why is my brain not
It's
working?
really thick,
Yes.
really thick, like a textbook, but has so much valuable information. That's one of the first books I read after my diagnosis.
Yes.
And I didn't know about the practitioner search, so I think that's great you highlighted it. I'll provide a link for that because I think people find that quite valuable. It's definitely difficult to find experts who can provide this type of guidance if you
This is what I found on my journey. So in all these bits of the puzzle, that's so on Neuro Fronteirs, there is a practitioner locator, and I've tried for all the bits of the jigsaw to point people in the right direction. And sometimes there's might be an individual or an organization in the whole world that might do this. Other times, I'm referring people to something like Razian Institute, who then have their own database of people. So, but it's just trying to put all the information in one place, because I spent 4 desperate years trying to do all this research and find out all these things, and I want to save people that heartache and ball ache, and then by giving them the resources there. And I mean, such a blessing, even just from starting up my website, people have given me more ideas and things that I already knew about them, but I forgot to put them on there, so it will get added to as time goes on. But hopefully that's a good help for people to have that. Yeah, so
definitely.
Yeah, because just going back to the guinea pig thing, my son, I tried different diets with him, an alkaline diet, ketogenic diet, and then and the GARD diet, John Symes, who sadly passed away now, but absolutely excellent, his low glutamate diet. So I can't think what else we tried, but a lot of things. And then when worked with various different practitioners, Nature Doc in the UK, Lucinda Miller as well, she was very good. And then we've ended up now on an anti neuroinflammatory diet, in which got his seizures, touch wood, down to nil now for 3.5 years. Wow. So
could you explain what that is and what it looks like?
Yes. So
if possible, if it's not too complicated.
No, I'll try and explain it in an easy way possible. So your brain, if you've got inflammation in your brain, it takes a long time for that inflammation to come down. Inflammation is commonly associated with seizures. And so if you can bring the inflammation down, then you're going to raise your seizure threshold and reduce the likelihood of you having a seizure. So the anti-neuroinflammatory diet's got 2 stages to it. Stage 1 is making sure that you have a healthy gut biome. So you're feeding a lot of good, mainly plant-based foods to your gut biome, and you within those as well, you are trying to encourage you to eat as many antioxidants, flavonoids, so that you are, and the type of flavonoids that you want are the ones that can cross the blood-brain barrier and help to reduce inflammation in the brain. So they are all included, and if that may work quite well, or there's stage 2 where you will adapt that for ketogenic purposes, so just having ketogenic but with all the steps as well. So there are some things you take out, so things which are inflammatory, certain things like gluten, dairy, soya, processed foods, sugar. We're nodding because it's like, oh, the usual list. Yeah, all anything beige or white goes. So yeah, so we're on that. I've got details about that as well on my website, again with a disclaimer or the big encouragement to personalize this, get this individualized by working with a professional. But there are some general principles on there that people could have a look at just to get a general understanding of the anti-neuroinflammatory diet.
And as another way of monitoring the efficacy of that, or the general health status, is Eddy having any lab tests that complement that, just to see how he's doing health-wise?
That's interesting, isn't it? No, he isn't. I mean, for me, the proof is that we've got back to a normal life. I mean, and the great thing about this diet, we aren't on the ketogenic version of it, we're just on the normal version, and that the whole family just eats it. So it's so easy, you know, and then so I feel super healthy, and you know, my daughter as well, you know, and it's all tasty and it's easy. And I think that's the nice thing. And I mean, before all of this, I was your typical chicken nuggets and pizza, maybe some fish fingers at the weekend, you know, so that was the sort of mum I was. And this has transformed my life. So this is another, you know, a silver lining for me, that, you know, my lifestyle and, you know, how healthy I am and my children are has been transformed as well.
Yeah, I think it helps that you're all doing it as well. If someone's following a so-called medical diet on their own in isolation, it can get tricky, especially in social occasions and those kind of situations. I'm just trying to think of the second thing on your kind of list.
Yeah, diet and the hyperbaric oxygen. So we did that before and after my son's surgery, and I was sort of thrilled with the results of that. It was to try and help the healing process of his surgery more than anything, and to reduce the likelihood of scar tissue. And so I remembered her name now. We were just talking about this before we came and did the interview. Petra Klimt. She's so in the UK we're very lucky. We've got Professor Philip James and Dr. Petra Klimt, who are based up in Dundee, and they are the two national advisors for the NHS on use of hyperbaric. So I got a prescription from them on what my son needed prior and post surgery. And when he had his post surgery MRI, they said it looked quite beautiful, if you like, for where his scar was. There wasn't, you know, and hopefully there still isn't the scar tissue there. So that was you know, a good thing. You know, I felt like I'd done my best there to reduce that likelihood, because once you got out of the frying pan, you don't want to jump into the fire. So yeah, that was a good thing. And then the exchange breathing method was the other thing which really helped. So shortly before my son had his brain surgery, which would have been 2013, I think, and so around that sort of time, through the Diets for Epilepsy group, and there were some, and still are, amazing, motivated. I mean, a lot of people in that group are highly motivated because they're so desperate. You know, conventional medicine's tried everything, and I am now I have to survive, and I have to solve this problem. So people are avid researchers on there, and a few people were talking about the benefits of breathing CO2, and this sparked an interest in me. So I then began looking at all of this as well. And with a lovely chap, Bernhard, who I'm an Austrian chap, very sadly he's passed away during the pandemic, but he fed me lots of ideas and said, oh, let's think about this, think about that. So and it was to do with the use of CO2 to try and stop a seizure. And we thought of lots of ways that, so you need, we'd read that CO2 had the it was possible to stop a seizure with carbon dioxide. And so we tried to think how we could get hold of this, and then it became through other bits of the papers and research, they said it's something called carbogen. Carbogen is a mixture of carbon dioxide and oxygen, and it comes in different ratios. So Bernhard then at some point, people were using, well, in America, some people had rebreathing masks. Like, you can get them, anaesthetists carry a stash of them for people who hyperventilate after they come out of anesthesia, but they're just sort of like a plastic bag that, you know, goes like a mask with an elastic band around the back of your head. And if anyone's listening, please don't try this. You need to be trained to be able to do this. Otherwise it's dangerous. And so we heard about these. We heard, and then we thought, oh, carbogen, and it comes from someone like BOC, British something chemicals. And so we tried these conventional commercial firms to get hold of this, but they all said you need a license to use carbogen and get these canisters. So, and then it came to me that, oh my gosh, we've actually got a free supply of carbogen ourselves, and it comes out of our mouth. So Bernhard said, brilliant, let's just take a plastic bag wherever we go. So like a supermarket plastic bag. So Bernhard was blowing into a bag, making it grow like this, and he then throwing it over his wife's head, which was, it sort of worked. It was random and it was sporadic, and then he said it didn't look good when they were out. So I was like, no, it probably doesn't. So and then I read some research about oh well, gosh, it was just random, really, reptilian models, and then I was reading about well, on the reptilian models bit, anyway, that certain animals have CO2 receptors in their nasal cavity. They, as far as I'm aware, they haven't been found in the human anatomy. That doesn't mean to say they don't exist. And so I then one day tried it with my son, just like a CPR breath. And when you're resuscitating somebody to get an emergency medicine, I gave him a breath of my air up his nose, and ding, his seizures stopped. And I was quite amazed. I tried it again, and it wasn't a coincidence. And then again, it's not a coincidence, it works. So I shared this, and then it's got wider and wider, and now hundreds of people use, I called it the exchange breathing method because of the gaseous exchange that happens. It's not maybe a catchy name, but
I think it's a great name.
Oh, well, you're exchanging your breath with a
person's.
person's. Yeah. So, and many people say that when they see somebody have a seizure, their lips go cyanized blue, grey blue, that sort of thing. You're obviously lacking in oxygen, and so something is wrong with the oxygen CO2 balance in your system. And yeah, so there are full instructions on the website, and you can see a video. You can join a discussion group about the exchange breathing method. So yeah, that was something that worked for my son, and I feel that in some ways it got him out of the habit of seizures as well. In neuroplasticity, neurons that fire together wire together. So the more you use a pathway, a neural pathway, the more it's embedded in your system. It's a familiar pathway that you like to tread. So by sort of breaking that, so I wonder whether that had an impact as well. It's only a theory. So that helped. And then the final piece of the puzzle for us is the neuroplasticity therapies, which my summit is covering in great depth. So my son's recovery, so two things. So neuroplasticity actually brings, so when this is when the brain's ability to learn. So when you're learning, you're creating new connections between neurons, axon and then a dendrite. So then you're having new communication happening. So learning and new connections being made. And that actually, so if that's happening, more blood is being brought into an area, so it becomes a healthier area. So we can think of that, like if you think of Alzheimer's or dementia, people like that, you can reduce the risk of that by using your brain. And I think of that as the brain is like having rooms, and this isn't accurate anatomy, by the way. If the brain's got rooms, then if you don't use a room, it will gather dust and go musty and horrible. But if you keep using and spring cleaning and going in there and, hey, I'll learn a new skill and I'll do this and I'll have a language and I'll learn music or whatever, then you're helping to bring nutrients into that area, and it will clear out as well. So there are benefits in terms of bringing down inflammation as well in the brain, just by being able to learn and using. So neuroplasticity therapies can help with that side of things. They also can help with, there's 4 types of them. So you've got things which you can create. So you've got create function or create performance of the brain. So you're creating function. So that's generally where an area of the brain, normal child development will do this. So you're developing and you have one milestone which builds upon the next milestone, which builds upon the next milestone. So that's the way your brain learns. So you're creating function. We naturally do that, but sometimes the process will stall or fail or not be completed properly. So you have to find a way around it, or you just get to a stalling point and you don't. A child may cease developing at a certain point. So but if you can encourage the brain to create again, and you find ways to stimulate the brain to be able to do that, then you can create function. Restore is the next one. So if you've had an injury and you want to so you had that ability once and then you want to restore it. So that's the second wave. I is for improve. So you can improve function, and that's when say you were a chief executive officer and you're 50 years old and you want to keep going at peak performance, or you're a musician or amazing badminton player and you want to have that peak performance. You just want to tweak a tiny thing and just be one bit better because you want to be the winner, you want to excel. So that, again, that's where something like neuroplasticity therapies can really be an aid to keeping you improving your performance. And the last one is M for maintain, CRIM, CRIM, maintaining, and that's something that we can all do. Again, how do you maintain that good brain health and good ability to learn neuroplasticity? So those are the 4 areas of neuroplasticity therapies. And yeah,
I guess exercise would fit in that too, right? I notice myself with my epilepsy, I can have a lower seizure threshold first thing in the morning, but if I go for a long walk and if I focus on my breathing, particularly if I breathe through my nose, which I try to do anyway because it's better, but if I go on these long walks, just focus on my breathing and clear my mind, my seizure threshold increases. But if I don't go for that walk, then it stays more or less the same. I have that low level seizure activity.
Yeah, so going for a walk early in the morning, so that a number of things could be triggered from that. So for example, you could be giving your brain the right information for the circadian rhythm. So here's some nice sunlight, so I'm triggering that. You might be helping with your motivational feel-good hormones because you're getting from A to B, and movement triggers some of that so that we're feeling like we're achieving, so you feel good. General exercise creates increased levels of circulation within the system, and we have, again, endorphins and so on being produced as a feel good. So there might be lots of ways that you are helping. So oh gosh, and BDNF, you're creating lots of so that which increases your ability to learn. So yeah,
brain derived neurotropic factor.
That's correct. Sorry, I should have said that. Yes.
No, it's fine.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people listening will know, but just for those who don't.
Yes. So there could be lots of reasons why exercise could help. So within neuroplasticity therapies, there are some lifestyle measures that you can take, and exercise is one of those lifestyle measures. But the exercise also comes in different forms, and we could talk about movement as an exercise, but movement isn't just pure exercise. We can move specifically to stimulate different parts of our brain. and working with somebody who's expert in this, some sort of movement therapist, whether it's a rhythmic movement therapist, somebody who's INPP trained, functional neurology, or Feldenkrais, Feldenkrais method practitioner. So these are all movement-based therapies which are or can be used to deliberately stimulate certain areas of the brain and then strengthen an area of the brain. Or you might say, I don't want to use that side because I want to inhibit, there's too much signaling going on in another area of the brain. So once you understand how the brain works and that there's this massive brain-body contract, the brain and the body are in constant communication through a loop together. And yeah, I was just thinking I have got an analogy for that to explain it, but maybe people already understand. Then you can use, your brain has an influence on your body, but your body has a massive influence on your brain. So go to somebody who's really well trained, and they can be very specific once you've assessed. So these are the things, two ways that neuroplasticity, or two elements to it, as an assessment and then treatment and then reassessment. So the assessment, finding out how well your brain is functioning, and then the treatment, what can I use in the body, and whether it's sensory or movement, to then remediate that. Then an underpinning layer of that is sort of lifestyle things, because you need a healthy brain in the first place. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting your time with doing neuroplasticity therapies. If you're absolutely fatigued, for example, then there's no point. You hardly be able to do anything. So what's behind that fatigue? Let's sort that out, and then you can get going with your neuroplasticity therapies. Or you might do very gentle amounts, because, as I said, there is a use for neuroplasticity in terms of how it can help, for example, reduce brain inflammation, but you just need to keep those levels low, otherwise you're going to take that person over their metabolic threshold, fatigue them. So
yeah, that's often a tricky balance, because you're trying to provide some stress to improve that, but then with epilepsy, the demands metabolically could be too much, that you have to have a period of rest just to recover, which happens with so-called normal people as well, but with epilepsy it's more pronounced.
That's very true, it is. So there's two things to talk about here. One is that neuroplasticity relies on two things. There's a focused mode and a diffuse mode. These are modes that our brains can go into. In the focused mode, you're focused on the task and you're learning something. And then the diffuse mode is when we let those thoughts and so on just mull around in our brain. And that's actually when it's like you've put the glue in, but now you need the glue to set and that's when the brain is growing new connections with the new information and embedding those. And so it's very important to have those rest periods in order that the learning can truly work. And we need to be specific about what that means. And it doesn't mean going and chatting to your friend or looking at your phone and doing a number of tasks on that, because no, you're just you're giving more and more input. So you need to do something like go for a lovely walk in nature, and you could do some meditation, you could have a nap for 20 minutes, something where it's that lovely daydreamy state where your thoughts are just flowing, you're on your bike and suddenly all the connections are being made, or you're having a nap or whatever. So it does rely on both of those things, which then ties in with the enough principle, which is when you find that sweet spot for that person. And there's a very as you use neuroplasticity therapies more, a good practitioner will be best or better able to estimate where that sweet spot's going to be, and they will sort of test you to your threshold, or try to stay within your threshold. There are I've tried, that's another thing on my website, I really wanted to try and put down there the sort of practitioners who are aware of the enough principle, because there are some people out there sadly, who take a bit of a DIY approach and just, oh right, you've got 17 things wrong with you, I'll give you 17 different exercises, and have no idea about metabolic thresholds or the enough principle. So that's there. And I do have a course running later on the year on neuroplasticity therapies, just giving an overview of them and teaching a few principles. So people are interested to find out more, they'll be very welcome to come and find out more on that.
I'd be interested in that. I'd also particularly be interested in something to do with exercise, and particularly strength training, because I find when I do more glycolytic activity, I can be prone to having seizures or just being metabolically just completely drained, where I need a long recovery. And interestingly, if I flex this arm, this bicep, I can trigger seizure activity in my face. And so I've tried to see if I can strengthen that connection, but it's been an interesting challenge. And I find just I can do with resistance training, I can do either very low repetition exercise, which is very intense, or I can do very low intensity exercise for hours at a time. But in between, I struggle with, and that can trigger seizures. I don't know if that's to do with an oxygen demand from the exercise, or if it's just too stimulatory, or yeah, I don't know. But I do find I can increase the intensity if my breathing is more in sync, and if it can keep up with that demand. So I'm thinking maybe I just need to get fitter and just push myself more gradually. I don't know.
So you've just said here's a number of things I experience when this happens, but everybody is unique. So, I could sit here and guess, but I wouldn't want to guess. I think, if you really wanted to get to the bottom of why this is, and it's best to work with somebody who can carry out a number of tests and say, it's likely to be this. And whereabouts in the UK are you?
I'm in Oxford.
Okay, I might recommend somebody to you after this, but
no, that would be great, because I've been trying to work it out myself, and I've seen a number of neurologists about this, and they can't recommend anything or give me any advice that's related to even why it happens. But I think it's probably mostly due to the fact that my blood sugar just becomes elevated, and that's one of my main triggers. Also, it's a kind of stress, and any kind of stress can trigger it. And also the oxygen thing. If I'm in a stuffy room, that can trigger my seizures too. So I always have the window open. Not right now, but my seizure threshold is pretty high today, so I don't need to do it. I judge it day by day. But yeah, I think that's a big thing, ventilation and focusing on how you're breathing. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, and that you have those resources that people can find, and find people who are experts in these things, because even more recently, I haven't been aware of that many people who have this specific expertise with epilepsy. It's just, I do feel like it's changing, and neurologists are being more open-minded, especially in Oxford, where I am. They're even, they can even provide consultations with Sapphire Clinic in London that has the cannabis-based medicines, which is a great step forward, I think, because previously that wasn't really an option. I don't know if you've explored that, or if you've had to. You say that Eddy's seizures are pretty well controlled now. Yeah,
so I did use it for, I had a lovely company, I can't remember what they're called now, but based in Jersey, and they were a great help, but not so much for seizures really, but well, a little at the time, but they suggested a certain one which would help with his sleep, and sleep is very important, and he did struggle with that for many years and still does sometimes, you know, and yeah, I would have some late nights and very early mornings, and the slightest thing would wake him up, so they suggested something which did seem to help. So yeah, but you know, he's changing and growing. He's a child and approaching being a teenager now, which he's very excited about. He's going to be the same as his sister. We'll both be teenagers. So yeah, so I think if I could give, I was just thinking with Eddie, can I give an example of how some sort of neuroplasticity happened? Because I think this is a very so we talked about how Eddie was before with his seizures, you know, difficulty walking, or, you know, for long periods, fatiguing easily, his eye, and doubly incontinent, and no speech. So speech, and he's transformed from that now. That's the amazing thing, and that's why I really want to share all this information on neuroplasticity therapies, because of the power of them, and how, goodness me, you know, and we're CRIM on the R bits, you know, so some bits because he was a child we were creating anew, and some bits we were restoring because he's had a huge, his left temporal lobe taken away. That's quite a huge chunk of your brain. And so he he had some sounds but not real speech at all, and so a couple of really good things happened. So we one of them was singing wise, and there's a therapy called Melodic Intonation Therapy, which I found out about afterwards, but I didn't know about it at the time, but it made what happens with my son make sense. So Melodic Intonation Therapy works if you've had a stroke and they've got something going awry on the left hand side. If your stroke's been on the left hand side and you've lost your speech, and I visited 9 people who had gone through this, and I was in tears many times because their stories were so moving, in that they would use singing to then be able to speak again, and they would adapt the singing area of their brain and speak. So my son started humming these things, and then he would say, and one of his humming things was "Adi-you-ah, adi-you-ah," and then one day he just stopped. He said, "Adi-you-ah, adi-you-ah, adi, 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 Eddie," and that's his name, Eddie. So, and we were crying because it was just, you know, and so I believe that he has adapted his own singing area, and he's still very good at sort of singing, and he yeah, picks up very much on tone of voice and all sorts. So I was really amazed that, you know, at that, and then to discover later that so many other people, gosh, I mean, and the saddest story was a man who'd had a stroke and had been in some sort of nursing home. They thought he had dementia for about, it was years he'd been in there, and then he talked, and I was really crying then because it was just such a tragic story. And then how somebody had introduced him to melodic intonation therapy, and he just been able to speak and say, "Get me away from all these crazy people, I'm fine." I don't want to go. So that was, you know, a really incredible story for him, but it made sense for my son. And then also with speech, movement and using the body to create better connections between the 2 hemispheres was the other thing. So he moved from being able to say individual words. He could read, so I could make him read words, and he could say, but construction of sentences wasn't coming very well from him, and so conversations weren't good. But then when we did movement exercises to cross the midline, going left to right, and these were tailored exercises just for him, then his speech came, a conversational speech, amazing. So yeah, this is the power of neuroplasticity therapies.
So this was tailored by an expert in this area?
Yes, yeah, in America. Mm-hmm.
So you were having, say, an online
I've traveled over there a number of times.
Oh, okay.
But they did come to the UK as well. So and that was really a great thing. Yeah. So I have since found people in the UK that could help as well. So yeah, really.
So how would people find out about that? Do you have links on your website?
Right. Yes, I do.
The one-stop shop, everything.
Yeah, under the practitioner locator. So you'll find all the different disciplines that are mentioned on the website. So I've tried to give people resources for locating practitioners of all the different sort of therapies there. Yeah.
Also, I guess we briefly mentioned light and our environment. I can give an example from me. In the hour before I go to bed, I have just red lights on in my bedroom. It's just all red. And I have a near infrared device, which I use in the mornings when it's still dark, because we're in winter at the moment. And that really helps me. And but if I don't do that, then I get poor sleep, and I can have a lower seizure threshold in the evening when I'm tired. And so I just wonder what you think about the light environment, and just environment in general, environmental triggers for seizures.
Oh, well, light, is, if you've got occipital lobe epilepsy, then yes, light is definitely a trigger, or certain types of flashing lights. So I think we all are aware of that. But in general, sort of the use of light, yes, definitely different frequencies of light can have different effects upon the brain, and our brain needs to have this information to generate something called circadian rhythms. Circa is about the time, roughly the time, and then of day, and so we use information from light to tell us about that and give us a good rhythm. So if maybe you are helping to do that with light that you're using, two professions that you could go and get more information about this. So for behavioral optometry, there's a wonderful man who's speaking at my summit, actually, John Glover, and he's been a behavioral optometrist and traveled all around the world, not only learning but lecturing a lot now. And he works, he's based at a university, lecturing in normal optometry, but also very interested in behavioral optometry. So the effect that behavior or more information from our body has, and on the visual system. So what other ways can we, and it isn't just about how well your eye is working, it's what's going on behind that, so it's not just to do with it. So it's a step above what normal your optician will do, because he's really thinking about what the brain's doing with that information. And then your brain doesn't work in areas of isolation, so your occipital lobe, in order to work, has to be has to have some interaction with your motor cortex to make the eyes move, cerebellum to coordinate everything. You might decide where to look, etc. And your amygdala might say, right, there's some threat, or your peripheral vision gets switched on. So John is very absolutely brilliant, and explains more about this. And they use things like syntonics, which are light-based therapies. So if you're interested, you should listen to John's talk, or perhaps get him on your podcast. He's quite a character.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about light and its effect, not only on the brain, but on multiple organs. We have clock genes in every cell of our body. So yeah, I'm fascinated by it. Also, with epilepsy, we know that there's often a kind of rhythmicity for seizures. People might be more prone to having seizures at different times of the day. So yeah, I'm fascinated by it because I've noticed benefits myself.
That's amazing. So yeah, look into that. So he's one area, and then functional neurology, it's definitely used within that profession as well. So those are two that really use light as a way into the brain.
Well, the eyes are an extension of the brain, right? Some see that, so they're even part of the brain, but we don't normally think that. It's not normally. obvious to us, but light going into the retina can change the brain quite profoundly, especially over time.
When we stop and think about it, though, we can notice certain things which tell us how bad the brain, and the association with the brain. So particularly during COVID, and people have noticed, my eyes are so red and I've got this horrendous headache. Yes, and that's not a coincidence. Your eyes are reflecting what's going on in your brain as well. So your brain is probably feeling just as bad, and well, not feeling, but the inflammation and the whatever's you can see of this redness and tiredness within the eyes. And I saw another a lovely MRI the other day of somebody rubbing their eye, and then that pumping the lymphatic system, your cleansing system. You can see the pumping going on as someone rubs their eye. So your brain is tired. It's wanting a swish out. It's not a coincidence that we rub our eyes. Now it's like, wow, someone's been able to see this on an MRI and figured out, gosh, it's doing something there. So it's fascinating. Light, vision, all these sorts of things.
Yeah, I look forward to registering for your summit. Actually, I haven't done it yet, but is there a deadline? Time. It's on the 17th. Starts on the 17th, right?
It does start on the 17th. So there, yes and no. So if you want to take part in some through the summit week, there are live sessions for people to connect with. They're called Connect and Support. So people can come to the sessions and connect with other attendees at the summit during those sessions. And then if you've got something you need support with, people grouping people off into small groups so that they can get to know each other, and then they can share their challenge. Is there something that's a challenge you need help with? And if you are an individual or a parent, it might be something, your own case that you need some help with, or a particular aspect of it. Equally, there might be researchers out there who think, gosh, I need some participants for this study. How can I get some? Or a teacher might be saying, has anyone got any resources or ideas of how I could implement this in my school? So there's lots of different reasons why people might come to a Connect and Support session, but they're great for networking and for getting this sort of nice support between people who attend them as well. So that's going on live. However, there's various options to watch the sessions after the summit. So there's 30 sessions and you can have access to them all the way through to December. And then as anyone who's got access, each month, apart from December and August, but at all the other months, there will be another Connect and Support session. So even if you've missed out on them all during the summit week and you want to purchase one of the options there, and I've tried to keep them as cheap as possible because I know how expensive it is when you're doing your own work, and that's why I've tried to keep all the price down. So people can purchase those and then still take part in a Connect and Support session, one a month. So that's some options for people.
Yeah, I think it's really great what you're doing with this. And what would you say your plans are for the future? Are you planning on having more of these summits and events and maybe workshops and other resources on your website?
Thank you. Yes. Gosh, I didn't know how it was going to go, but it feels like there's such a great interest. I've had so many people contacting me about what I'm doing. So I think this is amazing, and it in a way it's a silver lining from the pandemic as well, where I couldn't continue. I thought my silver lining from my son was, I'll help other people and practice in my own practice. But that had to cease during the pandemic. So then I had to evolve, and that's where the idea for the summit came in. So yeah, it's been amazing, really, a change for me. So yes, given what's happened now, and I'd definitely like to do more summits, and I've got some other silver lining projects on the way as well, but we'll just let those evolve as they come.
Well, I think we've come to a natural end. So I'd just like to thank you so much for everything you do and for sharing all the information that you have on this podcast. I think a lot of people will be very thankful for that, and you've provided so many resources that I can link people to, and more resources through your website. So thank you for that. And I'm hoping that more people can get information from the summit. And again, I think it's a great thing that you're doing with that, getting all these people together and sharing information, but also hearing from with each other, but also hearing from the experts. That's really important. So yeah, thanks again.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a really a joy to talk about all of this. So thank you.